Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian. I'm the host of the Left of Greg show. You're going to be watching the video version of our audio podcast. Please, guys, if you like the video, like it, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more content down there if you're already a subscriber, and a better way for us to get you guys some more stuff. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. Check out our links down below to get a hold of us and to actually find out more places where you can get more information about this. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook at HBPRNA. Remember, all these cases that we discuss and all these discussions that we have are through the lenses of what we call human behavior, pattern recognition, and analysis. So please like it, share it, tell your friends about it, and we hope you enjoy the show. Thanks.
Let me grab a quick sip, sorry.
Yeah.
Good call. All right, I'm ready, buddy.
All right, so I'm just going to kind of start a little bit differently, but same thing. All right, so start off with another Remoism, a Gregism, right? You don't have to speak the language to read the writing on the wall. So that's good start for today's topic of graffiti and what we're going to talk about, symbolism and iconography in it. So graffiti is important. Why? First off, another Remoism. If I take the time to write something down, whether that's on my Facebook page, on a wall, scribbled in concrete that's starting to dry. If I take the time to do that, it's important to me. So you might not care about it, but it's important to me, and I'm sending a message. So that's changed over the years throughout history of mankind, from early cave paintings, right, to modern day PowerPoints. And what I'm talking about, graffiti, it kind of encompasses all of that. So I think we'll kind of be able to start with it there and kind of see where it goes. So graffiti is important. Messages are important. Message clothing, stickers on your vehicle, all that stuff sends a message. So I guess we'll start at a 30,000 foot, Greg, 30,000 foot view here, Greg. And why don't you tell us, why is that stuff important? Because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of it out there, right? Especially with social media today, there's even more. So why is that stuff important?
Well, when Combat Hunter came around, before that it was called Urban Hunter, and before that, the idea was mulling around in the back of Mattis's head, and he reached out to a couple of key players, one Crusher, Colonel Clark Lathine, and the other a colonel that worked for the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. And those guys reached out and tried to get expertise in a number of different fields. And one of the things was that I had already had a fully mature program called pretexting and profiling. And the idea, very simply, a pretext is a reason to contact a human being or a vehicle. And whatever that pretext is, as long as the pretext is legal, the eventual stop is legal. And then you can find information, So
that came from law enforcement.
From law enforcement, yeah.
Right.
I apologize, Brian.
Because you do need a reason to go up and contact a person if you can't just all right.
But just so you know, and you touched on something very important, that was the same in the dojo. The dojo was looking for these things. Does the guy have a certain type of tat? Is the bulge in the pocket? There was different idiosyncratic
certain
elements of human behavior that are likely cues. And most people, because they're subtle enough, disregard them. So we're saying don't disregard the minutia, right? So the idea was that, well, hey, these domains already exist. So why don't we just modify them for the combat profiling piece of Combat Hunter, which was very easy. And you remember those as the 6 domains. So when it came to atmospherics, the atmospherics were simply iconography or symbolism or symbology. Look those up on your own, folks. But the idea was those visual images or the symbols or whatever representation, if they were taken collectively, they could be associated with a person or a movement or a specific. And then when we went in there, we said, okay, these were clearly atmospheric indicators, meaning that when you saw them or when there was an absence of them, that could help you draw a reasonable conclusion about an area or a vehicle or a hallway or a elevator, for example. And then it came down to a couple of the chuckleheads afterwards saying, oh, we have to go backwards and we have to add a whole new section in the 6 domains about iconography. No, stop. Atmospherics is a panacea of all of those things that may influence the scene that you're in, that may influence the environment. Does that make sense? So
right.
I'll give you an example, Brian, and I don't want to spiral out of control because we want to kind of stay laser focused.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the difference. I'll suggest that there's a difference between public and private graffiti.
Okay.
I'll suggest to you that there's a graffiti when I'm busy sitting at the bus station and my hands are getting cold and I just scratch something along just to waste time. Then there is a message. There's a difference between Banksy and the art house movement on graffiti and the message that I might get when I'm behind a power box in an alley in an urban center. So that's the importance. The importance is what message you're receiving, what channel it's being transmitted on, and can you use it as a comparison for human behavior? Because graffiti is a language. Violence is a language, right?
Yeah.
So graffiti is a language. Tattoos are a language. That's what I'm getting at.
Okay, and that's a good way to look at it too. So let's frame it as graffiti is a language, and now let's discuss all that. What falls under graffiti? Because I like putting I like using that as an umbrella term, right? Graffiti. Or now there's symbolism and iconography. So people go into, hey, this is the meaning. There's people that study that stuff, right? Spend their whole lives. This is the meaning behind this symbol, and this is what that means, which is great. It's great information to know. But sometimes, if the person who wrote that symbol on there didn't know that, then it doesn't necessarily mean that.
You can't use it. Exactly. What a brilliant, astute observation, Brian. And I hope that's not lost on the people listening or watching. For example, the Nazi cross, the twisted iron
the swastika.
cross, the swastika, used by the Chinese thousands of years before for a completely different purpose. So don't pigeonhole yourself by saying this means that. You have to understand the context and the relevance and then measure it against a baseline to determine what it is, and then conduct a couple of interviews to say, hey, what's with this sign? And we do that all the time. We call it graph in the business, GRAF, like the graph SPI. And Brian, when we're walking around on the radio, that we'll talk back and forth. I got some good graph over here. Then we'll go and we'll have to determine the likely relevance of the graph. It doesn't mean anything unless it's processed. It's like a flipping latent fingerprint. It's useless unless you process it, then tie it to a suspect, and then tie it to the environment.
Okay, so that's another good way to kind of get laser focused on it too. So graffiti is because we can put it under tattoos, clothing with certain messages on it, the stickers
Bumper
on your
stickers.
vehicle. I like using that as a term of under graffiti because it's all symbolism and iconography. But the word graffiti makes more sense to me. And here's the thing: is that everyone listening, everyone who has Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, you all are graffiti artists. You're graffiti writers, right?
Yes.
So it's no difference than what you post in Facebook is called your wall, right? I post this on my wall, and you'll write a message or a saying or post a picture. Well, that's to us from a human behavior perspective. That's no different than taking the old rattle can out there, going behind a building, and spraying your message on there. And so there's a great photo that went around the internet. I love it because it says it's spray paint on a wall. It says things I hate most. Number 1, lists. Number 2, graffiti. Number 3, irony. And I was like, that's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
If I was going to get a tattoo on my immense forehead, that would be the one.
And
Brian, can I relate a funny story about your rattle can observation?
Please do.
So we're at a location in the northern part of California, and I refuse to divulge the location, but certain people were shipping out to a very dangerous spot, and so we had to go to a local place outside of the Stumps and go to a store, and I can't remember if it was a Target or a Walmart or whatever else, and we were in a hurry because we had to have a certain amount of devices, IDs in location for these troops for this long and arduous process they were going to go through. And nobody had the ID simulators back then that early. The only thing was the real things, and they weren't letting you touch the real things. You remember that? We could go and see them, but we couldn't take them out in the field, so we had to make our own. So if you recall, we had driven out there in the rental sled, and we were lined up at the Home Depot. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
We were lined up at the big table at the Home Depot near the checkout, and everybody was in line with the shopping carts that we had put together. And we said, okay, this is the first thing, take this. This is the first thing, take that. Then take this. And we were doing this en masse. And the guy at the checkout and his manager and a door greeter were watching because we were in quite a hurry. And we grabbed a couple of baseball bats. You remember at the store next door, it was a sporting goods store. So we have all this stuff laid out. And as we were going down the list to make sure we had enough stuff to make these convincing looking IDs for the unit to find, we also had to camouflage them. So if you recall, we told the guy, and we'll need a couple of cans of spray paint.
Yeah.
Now, while we were building these mock bombs in front of them,
which
all
most
the
of the components could have been real bombs.
They were the real things.
They were the real
it's
things.
the only thing we didn't add.
You didn't mix up the explosive.
Exactly. So there was no HME.
Yeah.
They never asked us what's this for, who we were, anything else. But I remember the manager stepping out and going, "Whoa, hold on there. We're going to need to see some ID." And ID was scarce back then, if you recall. And my thing was, I was going, "Hey, do I get a buffalo this guy?" And I go, "Hey, what's with the ID, pal?" And he goes, "Well, you're getting those spray cans, and graffiti is such a, man, tagging is everywhere." They weren't worried about the bomb components. They weren't worried about any of the stuff we were going to do with the baseball bats and the ski masks. But that spray can. And you know what's funny? I love that you use the term graffiti, because graffiti has been called graffiti and has been around, 2,500 years
longer than that,
before the birth of Christ.
Before,
but you get what I'm trying to say. The idea is that it's not generational.
Right.
It's not
just
not something. Yeah, it's not a fad, and it's not going anywhere.
Well, and that's I'll hit it from the historical perspective real quick then too, is that's where it starts, right? So, graffiti, all that stuff, what you're doing on Facebook, what you're doing on Instagram, your Yelp review is no different than something that was done thousands of years ago. I remember a few years ago when the articles came out about, the ancient city of Pompeii, and they found all this graffiti, and guess what it said? The food here sucks, scribbled on a building. The wine here was bad. I hooked up with so-and-so here, or this guy is a jackass. All the exact stuff we do today was done 4,000 years or 3,000 years ago. And it's no different than, and I always give the example too, when we're teaching of, you got to use a PowerPoint, and people like, images and all that stuff. And a PowerPoint presentation is no different than a cave painting.
It's exactly the same.
This is what's important to me. I want you to see it. So that's where graffiti, that's where I like to see it. It's the same thing with tattoos. And this isn't a knock on anything. I've got tattoos, and you're sending a message, right? Each one of those things tells a story. Now, what the relevance is or how important of that story is going to be dependent from one person to the next. But it's I can't jump to conclusions, but I can draw likely conclusions or reasonable conclusions and expected behavior out of someone based on what they're telling me, based on what they're showing me. Correct. So that's why
I think you have two things there. So, and again, when we say like two things, what we're doing is we're saying there's either a difference with a distinction or a difference without a distinction. And these are subsets, let's call them scientifically, inside of this order that we're calling graffiti. So, for example, if it was art, pardon me, if it was art versus messaging, to me, there's a difference. And I'll give you an example. If you remember, we were tagging up. Sorry, I shouldn't have baked that last rock. Hey?
Yeah, you hit that rock. I got you early.
We were tagging up that place down in along the border in Texas, and we were trying to make it look as realistic as possible of an outpost for a area, so it would appear as though the area that these people were about to get shipped into. So we're very, very carefully making sure that the graffiti we put up mimicked the area in which this small select group was going. So when they got there wouldn't be culture shock, and they would say, I've seen these images before. I know
building file folders.
So they had sent somebody out to help me. And the person they sent out to help me was from a federal police agency that was close by. And that person was an expert on graffiti. And so they walked by, and when they were going by the walls, I remember them saying, okay, well, this is abstract, and this is bubble, and this is representative of what we would have called old school. And then you have sharp, but if you take a look at this, these are fat caps. And I stopped for a minute, and I go, okay, that's the most amazing thing in the world. And I started actually writing them down. And I go, okay, but
let me tell you
tell me this, sir. Tell me this, sir. What does any of that mean? Oh, nothing. These are just subclassifications of the type of lettering or the type of paint, or whether, for example, when they do what they call the brush means that the finished product looks more like artwork than the. And I go, okay, but how does that help you pick the guy? And they go, oh, no, it doesn't. Well, we were just telling you these are so okay. So you're giving me the Dewey Decimal System,
right?
And what I want to know is very simply: is this dangerous or is this not? Does that make sense?
And that's a great point, and I'm glad you said you're giving me the Dewey Decimal System. What is a Dewey Decimal System? Which no one probably listening even actually some of
by
our
the way, I'm
listeners
sorry
know
for
what
that.
that is.
Some guy just hit a parked car going, what the hell are they talking about this morning, right?
So that in a library to find and classify books on sections so you can find what it is you're looking for. That's a classification.
Rapidly.
Yeah, so it's
more rapidly than going from the first book to the last book,
right.
right?
It's a way to classify different
Yep.
types of material. All right, let's put it in a box so we can understand it. And this box leads over here, and then that again in a set and subsets, right? So we do that with all kinds of things, and that's important, right? But that system isn't going to help me understand what it is on the wall I'm looking at. And that's why I started this by saying you don't have to speak the language to read the writing on the wall. And that goes into what you were talking about with atmospherics and how graffiti or tattoos, message, clothing stickers on your car add to the atmosphere, right? The feeling or the mood. And we're not talking about the barometric pressure, right? Just the feeling or mood, right? So I grew up on the south side of Chicago, so I know when I went from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, that atmospheric shift would tell me, okay, this is probably more of a high crime neighborhood. This is a poor community, right? So if you've had those experiences, you know what that's like. So what's going to change? Maybe some of the buildings are a little bit more unkempt. The grass is a little bit overgrown. Cars are older and beat up. There's graffiti here. There's less advertising, where the advertising's for different types of products than there are 3 blocks over, right? So that's all an atmospheric shift that leads you to believe that.
And let's put a fine point on that for our listening audience and readers real quick, Brian. Okay, so because on this block the weeds are growing and there's more graffiti on the wall and there's a broken window that hasn't yet been fixed and there's an abandoned car that has yet to be towed, means nothing about the folks that live in that area.
No.
What it means is that they've got enough on their plate that they haven't taken the time to go out and do that. Perhaps they don't have the money to get a string trimmer like your gosh damn golf course where you live. It means nothing about the people that live in those homes.
No, it's not about it's not a value judgment or about their character. It's they might not be able to do that because they're working 3 jobs.
Exactly.
So
so what you got to do, and for example, that ties in great. Brian and I were zooming down some back streets to meet my brother Brian Williams in Saudi Arabia. And you remember that one district that we went by, and there was the graffiti that was
remember when is your legal counsel? Let's keep it to a minimum what we talk about. So,
but let's put it this way: do you remember when we went down the wrong street and we went by that place that looked like where they were going to chop off a bunch of heads? And the idea is we took photos of the graffiti, and then we went back and we talked to an expert, and the expert says, okay, I'll tell you what this is. This is the guy's phone number, and it says this is the greatest place for a lube job in this area. So all it was you see,
advertising.
So it was advertisement for this guy's store where he was going to do work. So you can't just look at something and go, wow, it's a little dingy here. They live in a desert, folks. Do you get what I'm saying?
And that's a great way to understand perspective and the context in which you actually view it, right? So to us, all that graffiti, I'm like, man, I know when I turn the corner and all of a sudden I see a bunch of scary looking writing on the wall because it's in Gulf Arabic and I don't know what it says. You can pick out a few symbols or a few words that
Precisely.
But you don't know what it completely says. And then, obviously we always take photos of it and go back, but you're looking at like, hey, how, this is all. And then you go back and the guy's like, no, this is how people advertise. Look, this is Ahmed's barber shop. Here's his hours. Here's his phone number. This is Joe. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that makes sense to me.
And you can tell where you are, Brian, too. Like for example, if we're in San Francisco and we're headed to Oakland, we're in San Francisco and the people that are walking with us while we're going to the coffee shop look and go, oh my gosh, that's the most beautiful street art.
Yeah.
And the stuff that I was seeing, if we were in Detroit, I would already be getting a whitewash and ready to clean the fence. That differentiation. And I think the level of anonymity, like where do you most see graffiti near your house? Yours, it's on the cardboard box in which you live.
I've got
while you're huffing paint.
The dumpster to the left of me and the dumpster to the right. That's how I tell them apart.
But think about it. Sometimes the only graffiti that people will see is in a train on a train car that goes by or at a train station. Why? It gives you a degree of anonymity and time to paint on something when you and your peeps are hanging out. So the level of graffiti, how well it's emblazoned, how much time was taken.
How much time it took.
Each one of those. And Brian, the multitude of colors. I mean, go to your local Walmart and say, hey, what's the most common color of paint that's used? Gold. Why? People are huffing. What's the next most common? Black or white, because people are using it for whatever, signage or
Marking,
something.
yeah.
So if you see something that has literally all the colors of the rainbow, Rainbow Roy G. Biv showed up that day, and all that other stuff, well, that's a level of complexity that's going to beg the question, hey, is this an art project? You get what I'm saying? What message is here? Where did this guy go to get all this paint? How did he have this time? How did he get up? Was he on a ladder at some point, or rappelling? Like, you see the ones that are on the overpass on California on the 5.
Yeah.
And you immediately wonder on the 1 or the 5, you go, how did the guy get there? Well, that was part of the challenge. The challenge was you have to tag, meaning tagging is where you leave part of your identity in the message. For the folks at home. So you would tell some young kid that wants to be in a gang, hey, you got to tag the 9/11 posse, and you got to do it on this street in Crenshaw or whatever. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So that's a challenge. But we wouldn't know that if we don't do the, hey, what's the baseline for this area? What are the artifacts or evidence? And how do they compare against that baseline in stride?
So
Coppers, if you're listening, EMS, if you're listening, you got to start taking photos, and you got to start asking the questions. What does this mean to me today in this area on this call?
Yeah, no, and that's a great way to help decipher it, right? So we do the obviously human behavior pattern recognition and analysis. So this is that analysis portion. So don't jam the square peg into the round hole, right? So one, there's a lot more literal graffiti, what people think of paint on a wall somewhere in cities. There's more out there than I guarantee 99% of people realize, right? It's usually found in certain areas, alleyways, back areas. So now you've got the difference, because you brought it up. So let's just hit it right now, because we're still on that actual spray paint. Kind of, you alluded to different gang activity for tagging is public versus private graffiti.
Yes.
So messages that are out there, like you just said, I see it, on the 5, on that, on an exit sign. Someone had climbed the wall, hopped over, did it in the middle of the night, got up there, and they tagged their set or their clique or their crew on there. That's that's message is intended for everyone to see. They want everyone to see that. So now what would be an example then of what you just said about private graffiti? And how do I know when I see that?
Yeah, I'll recall an incident where you, teacher Atkinson, and I were south of the border in California. And
I know. I will admit
again, the legal
I will
stuff.
admit to nothing. So,
but as we were coming back, Teach pointed out a couple of key graffiti points, and we started following the graffiti. And if you recall, that we later talked to the ICE and the U.S. Border Patrol guys, BORTAC, BORSTAR, the graffiti was specifically set up so somebody coming from south of the border into California in those areas would be able to follow them to specific things. And just like the old code down in America's southeast, where you could tell on the, carved into the wall, that this lady would let you have some handouts, and you could sleep in this guy's backyard, and he wouldn't call the cops, and there was no vicious dogs. Those messages were intended for people migrating into the United States to do so with not words. It was more symbolism than symbology, and there were some words to it. But again, they weren't. It was not a PhD dissertation. It was, hey, here are these things. This is where you don't want to be. If you go up here, you could get caught. And we followed him for a good long time. And if you recall, we were like, Teach, how do you know that? And he was like, we're not going to talk anymore about that topic. And so that's one example. So those were intended to be private messages. From one group to another group, or one person within a group to another person within that group.
And understand that stuff is still taught today. Like, you look at tradecraft, spycraft of intelligence, folks in the intelligence community, and basic running assets, like that's still done where, okay, the chalk mark here means there's a drop here or a meeting in 2 days at this
time. Everybody's walking by, and the people on the bus never notice it. And you'll remember Teacher educating on that day. I didn't want to go too far, Teach, if you're listening. God bless you and your new daughter Henrietta and your lovely wife. But Teach with his tattoos, and he stopped us in the hallway and he said, "Hey, it's just like my tats." He says, "I have public and private tats."
Yes.
He said, "These tats are the ones that I like to show the public, and these are just for me. These are symbolic only to me." Well, that's exactly the same with graffiti, Brian. Some of those messages, when you have a thing that says on your car, "Hey, my kid's an honor student at Pleasant View High School," or whatever. Okay, you're proud. You're showing your kid. You get what I'm saying? The old thing was wall drug back in the day. If you were traveling across the American West, wall drug was this attraction. And what would happen is if you parked at Wall Drug, even to get gas or to go in and see what the the largest ball of twine was or whatever, or the largest jackalope, what they would do is they would tag your car with these bumper stickers.
Yeah.
So then it would be a form of advertising. So you have to look at that. Am I being? Do you remember Greece? We came out and on Shanya, and there was the signals that warned the people that the cops were going to be there, and they had the red flags that were coming out, and the communists were going to have the
remember,
parade.
once again, I get sent to all the bad
Oh,
places.
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
get any of the Greece trips, but yes, I know.
I was going to tell you, it was when we were at that fine restaurant, and the
Not
Saginaw.
me.
You remember when they regaled us with all the gold and they
not
gave
me.
us the property
Not
for
me.
free?
I was probably in some hot arid environment at that time without
you probably had a hot
asshole.
STD and you were at the World Health Organization.
Whatever. Hey, I've been
your business.
Been the focus of many scientific studies.
But that point, Brian, the point being public versus private, detailed messaging versus artwork, hastily thrown up versus this guy had a bunch of time to do it. Each one of those is hugely important. And hey, graffiti is transient. Sometimes it changes. Do you know that marking over a piece of graffiti could cost you your life? It's a death sentence, buddy.
Right.
So you need to make sure that you're taking accurate records of those, just as you would tattoos, just as you would a scar or a fingerprint.
And I want to get to, because you brought up the vehicle sticker stuff, but the real quick, just to go back to that graffiti and spray paint on the ground. Anytime, I've always, live in cities or going around, if I see that stuff that looks like a gang symbol or someone marking their area, just a good take a picture and remember something about a memory motion link. Hey, that's the silver, triangle gang, because that's what they always use, silver, and there's always a triangle involved. So anywhere I see that, I now know their territory, right? And that's just walking down the street. And then you come across something like that with that X'd out. I go, look, I have nothing to do here. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not in gangs, but I may be walking into an area that's in the middle of some type of gang turf war, and I don't want to be.
Do I need to be here?
Yeah, exactly.
Do I need to be? And I'll give you another one. If you want to take a look at, like, we get these all the time. Same question from coppers when we travel around the country teaching. Hey, I had this string of car burglaries, and we found out that most of the cars were unlocked, no damage was used, and the items that were taken was the change and the CDs out of the whatever. CDs were these things you put in a radio, and we would tell the people all the time, okay, you've got a low level of sophistication, you've got a low level of organization. What it is some neighborhood kids that are out after hours grabbing the money, and then the same thing with the tats. They would the graph rather. They would put the graffiti up on the wall, and it would be a swear word, or it would be a swastika, or it would be the something marked out, and the people would go, well, what do you glean from this? Well, in our history, that means it's neighbor kids. Well, the neighbor kids were out wilding, and they did it, and they were laughing when they wrote that thing. And
you've seen that recently with some kids who got in trouble and did same thing. They were just like a bunch of punk kids being vandals, and they put a bunch of swastikas up, and then now.
But what did the neighborhood think? What did the news media say? People are afraid.
We have this neo-Nazi movement. And which that's a horrible image, but when you look at, you investigate it, like those kids were being asshole kids,
and it's not a reasonable conclusion.
And they weren't part of some group doing something. What they did was absolutely wrong, and they clearly don't understand their history. And
they mimicked something they didn't even know.
Yes, they didn't even.
They
know.
were acting out, right?
Yeah.
And so what happened though is, I think in those instances, now all of a sudden the community is in an uproar. Next thing you know, you got the articles on the news saying, "Oh, this is terrible," and all. People don't need to be afraid for those type of things. People need to understand that it's a level of education, and it's a gap. Nobody was watching their kids that night, and they were out wilding. They were out doing stupid things. And when I mean that term, I don't mean anything by that term other than my dad used to call it being on the wild.
Yeah.
What he would do is, even the neighbor kids, my dad would walk out with a beer in one hand, with his white T-shirt and no shoes or socks on, with his blue GM pants, and he would smack somebody upside their head and say, "You kids are wilding. Time to get home." And we would go home. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Because we knew it was out of bounds.
Yeah, so that's a very similar recollection I have of my father, except he had no pants on, and I was being brought home by the Chicago Police Department.
Exactly.
And they were pissed because they had to deal with me, which means they weren't dealing with actual real criminals out there. So they were just pissed.
Your average person doesn't know the difference, Brian.
Yeah.
The idea is that FTO programs are incredible. Back in the day, there was no such thing as the FTO program, Field Training Officer Program for law enforcement. It would happen is they put you with a senior guy that would hopefully not get you killed. And I remember my first senior guy with a big wad of chew in his mouth, and chew stains all over his uniform. He said, "Don't touch the radio, and don't touch the car keys." That was my good advice. But there's a lot of coppers that are hitting the road right now and don't have perhaps the social experiences. Perhaps they've never been in a variety of baselines. Maybe they haven't traveled. Maybe they're not polyglots. They don't know different languages. And all of
I
a
didn't
sudden,
even know what polyglot meant. So
yeah, I know. I sent that to you on a text just before he used it.
thought
So
that was something
you
else.
could look it up. No, you had a polyglot. Penicillin cleared
I
it
was
up.
going to say the
But
doctor said I'm good.
The idea is, though, that, listen, imagine that kid being in that scout car, that young male or female, and their field training officer is saying this and that and the other. You don't want to go up and go, "I've never seen graffiti in my life. I'm more flip-floppian than I am hip-hopian.
Yeah.
So I don't know this cultural message or this sociological message." So what happens, Brian, is we think that everybody knows that. We think when we call the coppers or dispatch, they're going to know what these, pieces of graffiti mean, or whether it's public or private. And if I told somebody that, they're going to go, that's not always the case, though.
Yeah, and so all good points. So let's get to the vehicle stickers. We'll stick with that specifically for a little bit, just because I know a lot of folks, like we said, are driving right now, listening to this, so you can see it right now. You can look out your window, start identifying vehicles, look at what they have put on there, because each one of those has meaning. So I always, common ones you see is when you do like stickers of and I've seen it just like, you got the mom and dad and then the 3 little kids, or
which by the way, we're completely against.
Yeah,
because
for a number of reasons. Look, I get it. You're
want to get attacked and kidnapped. Yeah,
but you're telling everyone in the world what's going on, and the names are on there. Or you see it when you go down like south or in Texas like that. I'll see like 2 M4 stickers and then 3 little pistol like Glock stickers, which means so that's the mom and the dad and the 3 little kids.
Same with the baby on board. Back when you were a little. You were 5-6 years old, running around with the beard on your.
I still had a beard at the time.
He did. But think about that. That stuff can be misutilized. You're very proud, but it's giving me personal information about you. And in the years now of identity theft, you don't want to do that. You don't want to broadcast that sensitive information across your bandwidth.
You even see it with, and I'll be the first to make fun of like guys I know, military guys who are trying to like, hey man, you want to be the gray man, you don't want to stand out, blah, blah, and then you go out to their vehicle and it's like combat vet, this blah blah blah, like all are like, dude, you tell me that you like to go hang out in Moab, Utah, that you are a marathon runner, that you were a combat veteran, here's what unit you were in, you got this award, like you're telling me everything about you.
We got in the trick bag in Lejeune.
Don't say the unit.
We were working out of Geiger. I won't say MARSOC at all. I won't bring up MARSOC because now
you have the photos from the parking lot.
Yeah, and all we did is we walked around and we said, "Here's your chain of command. This is the people's names. And this is the car they're driving." We don't have to go and run the plate. All we got to do is see that vehicle again in town. And they got all bent out of shape. Oh, that's, secure area. And well, it ain't secure if the fat guy was taking photos of your flipping sled. And the idea was, we didn't mean to poke anybody in the eye.
No.
It was just the idea of what you project to the world, certain people are reading. And when they read that, first of all, don't get all bent out of shape about bumper stickers on a car. Car might be a stolen. Friends might have tagged it up. Yeah, it might not be their car. It might be their daughter's car.
That's a great one. You should tell the story, the Marine Major.
Yeah.
That one's a great one.
Okay, so you remember that one, and we were sitting outside of some dingy gosh darn place doing a surveillance, and then all of a sudden the radio crackles, and it was a great guy on the radio said, "A1 coming your way," and so as the vehicle pulled in on the back, and this was during the workup for Iraq. A lot of things were going on during that time, and here the entire back of this vehicle was emblazoned with anti-U.S. government, anti-U.S. military, specifically anti-war and anti-Marine stuff. I'm tired of this. We're not going anymore. We don't believe in this and all that other stuff. And it was like, holy Moses, this is interesting. So I told everybody on the net, hey, I'm going to follow and stop this vehicle. When it stops, I'm going to talk to the driver and contact him. So what we did is we followed him around, and then when he pulled into a place to get fuel, I walk up, and a guy that pops out is in his Marine Class A's. I don't know what you call your dress uniform, but clearly he was going somewhere that was very important to him, and he was in a hurry. And I walked up and I said, hey, the messages don't fit. And right away he said, not me, my wife's car. And I've been deployed so many times that she's tired of it.
Yeah.
And this is her way of lashing out. Okay? And you don't have to look too far to look the USS Cole during that same period. You remember the guy that was a government contractor?
Yeah.
And had the USS Cole we cried, they cheered, or whatever he had on it. It was some very simple message. And that almost went up to the Supreme Court.
Right.
They were going to deny him the ability to come.
Base, and it turned out his son died on the USS Cole, and it was it's you can't jam that square peg in a round hole. You don't know.
That's the point. The point is that you can't make these obtuse comparisons without artifacts and evidence to support reasonable conclusions. And guess what? The tail of the tape, Brian, is what we do. We go up and flash our ID and say, hey, listen, we're social scientists. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. You know what? 99 times out of 100, the people say yes. And we say, we saw these behaviors. What do they mean? And they engage us in conversation. Every once in a while, we get to go F yourself every once in a while. And guess what? It fits like a hand in a glove on the observations we've made prior to that. We could tell you which people are going to tell us to go pack it. So I would tell you that if you make those observations, one, record it for posterity. Make sure that you get that photo. Two, go to a resident expert. Don't go to some guy and he says, yeah, I stole one of those down by the Walmart, because that guy's not going to help you decipher it. And three, if you've got a place like NCIS or one of these law enforcement places, RIMN, for example, Rocky Mountain Identification Network or Information Network for coppers, send them that stuff. Send an email and say, hey, local cops, my name is Jeff and I live,
I got to put it, I forgot it now. I'll put it in the details of the post. There's a national one you can do too. That where people submit,
right?
They just
I don't know what these mean.
Graffiti. And
okay.
And that's a great one.
My thing is that it's just like the fight with Wicca, and a person saying I'm Wiccan and it has nothing to do with witchcraft. Love the thing. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And then you got the Satanists that say, no, hail Satan. If you don't know what you're talking about, what you can do is mix metaphors. You can mix information.
Right.
Destroy an investigation or an observation or a conclusion.
Well, it'll
don't fit that round peg into that square hole, and don't be in a hurry to get to an unreasonable conclusion.
Right, and that's a good point to bring up. So especially with the bumper stickers and different stuff people put on their vehicle, like we draw conclusions based on it, but we always have to do that. Well, maybe it's not that, or if it is this, what else should I see? So, and we always say be careful with people about putting that stuff out. Yeah, I get it. You're proud of your family or your kid doing this, but now you just gave me. I have some information about you, so I can walk up to you, and it's like when you see this truck protected by Glock, Second Amendment, whatever.
I
can
have
walk
my
up,
gun when
I can walk up
from my gun.
Now, I can go. All right, this guy likely has a gun on him or in that vehicle. Now I can go approach and say, hey, what's up, man? What's your I carry a Glock 19 because that's my standard. What do you go? Oh, now I'm now you and I are in a conversation together. We don't know each other, and I've got you. You're not even aware of what's going on. I could be getting more information from you.
And you're going, hey, I must know this guy, and you don't want to be rude. And guess what? That's a street crime right there, ready to happen. Brian, I want to remind you of something that you probably forgot, because this was sort of a hastily called podcast today because we were on a phone conversation with somebody else. Do you remember the incident out west where the guy had the sign with all of the information on it, the hand lettered sign that was standing in the intersection, and he was waving at all the different people, and you told the other folks in the car, hey, listen, pull around so we can get a pphoto. And one of the newer instructors said, what are you talking about? And you said, hey, if this guy took that much time to write the Magna Carta on that sign.
Yes.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, I can't. No. Well, I'm in a total blank, but I know exactly what you're talking about because I had something similar out here by me. But that was on a road. That was on a trip.
We were on a trip, and the idea was that this message said what the guy was going to do, when he was going to do it. All the other steps were laid out on this, and it was a warning. And nobody else, everybody was beeping, and some people were actually slowing down and giving them change.
Money,
And it was a threat. It was not a veiled threat. It was a well-written, well-organized scheme of maneuver where this person was saying that, hey, get thee out of my AO, because on this day and this time I'm going to do dangerous stuff. And had we not flipped around, had we not taken those photos, everybody else missed it, because what did they see? They saw what they wanted to see. They saw
this guy's asking for money.
Asking for a couple of bucks.
He's got a sad story. He's doing this. Yeah, if you don't take the time to read that, well, that's why I always read all those signs. Anytime you see the bum on the side, your natural reaction is to look away. I don't want to make eye contact because then he's going to come up and ask me for money. But I make darn sure that I read exactly what's written on there because it might be a message demonstrating my intent to do something that is illegal or it's a threat to me. So you always have to read that stuff.
This is for the people that like to turn this into a study project. Go do your homework. There's a specific one where the guy used the F word, the draft, D-R-A-F-T, about being drafted into the military. on his jacket. He hand lettered it on there, walked into the draft board, ripped up his draft card, and oh my gosh, it went everywhere. It's like burning the flag. Burning the flag is a message, but guess what? It's protected under the
Yeah, it
First
is.
Amendment. Okay,
Yeah, you don't
so
have to
don't
agree with
sit
it,
there.
but yeah,
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to say, Brian. Don't sit there and look at that. If it's not offending a person, if it's not a threat against a person, sometimes the stuff that you're convinced is illegal has nothing to do with the law, and
right.
it's inconvenient, yes, and it's embarrassing, but it has nothing to do with the law. However, there are certain messages that people put on that are natural selection. Do you get what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say? When they're going into Columbine
yeah,
and saying, "Hey, listen, I'm going to kill a bunch of people." Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. One had natural selection, the other had wrath, and these are messages that were portraying the anger that they held. Alone, meaningless, but when combined with other evidence on that morning or tied together with other evidence accumulated over a period of time, everybody and their brother knew something was coming and nobody did a thing. How come it is, Brian, that we go around to these places and everybody says afterwards, hey, if we were going to pick the person that was going to act up and act out, it was
yeah. It
that
was that
person. How
guy.
come? You
Well,
know?
yeah, and that's the idea. That's part of what goes into graffiti is that what we always say, humans are constant. We're constantly on transmit, right? We're
Yes.
constantly telling the world, our environment, how
It's part of our ecosystem.
yeah,
We have to.
what's
We
important
want
to
an
us. Yeah.
identity.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone wants to have, their identity. They want to have their say. They look, this is what's important to me. And we scream
Exactly.
that by, everything, the clothes we wear, the words we use, the words we choose not to use, the slang terms, how we
We
wear
say
our
we want to
hair,
be,
everything
yes,
is
we
good.
say we want to be unique and
Yeah.
different. Then we pick a person out of a magazine and say, make me look like that. We
Yeah,
say we want to be
exactly.
unique and different, and we end up looking like all those goth people in a room. And it's cool. Choose whatever you
Yeah.
want to choose. What you do in the privacy of your own home is your own business. And if you take it into public, God love you as long as you're not hurting somebody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
But those messages lead up the rich fabric, the granularity, the fidelity of those observations that we make, Brian, are what makes us human behavior pattern recognition experts rather than these posers that you see on these sites all the time. For example, if you just talk about body language, okay, body language is
Yeah.
one dimension of
Yeah.
a
That's
huge thing. And you're not going to determine anything by just saying that move at that time means this.
you
That's
you're
horse crap.
you're going to determine more based on the entire context of the
It
situation than
must.
just oh, I scratched my nose when you
Yep.
asked me that question. Like that's why we always start big to small, right? That stuff up close
Exactly
when
right.
you've understood everything that's involved. If you don't understand how you process information, there's no point in learning how to read body language. It's not
So
going to help you.
the sergeant major at that place near
But,
the
okay,
thing
very
that had
careful.
3 letters.
Stop.
You know, we weren't at the FBI National Academy. It wasn't weapons training battalion. It wasn't the
Stop.
same people.
Stop.
But the guy coming up and saying, "Hey, we're doing this all wrong. We're at 3,000 meters, moving to 1,000 meters, moving to 600 meters, and then all of a sudden going down on patrol in the street. Why don't we start sitting in the room across from the guy?" Okay, one,
Yeah.
you clearly were asleep during my entire course.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you can make those observations limited only by the fidelity of the optics you're carrying, you can save a lot of lives by seeing those things with a drone or seeing those things with some other platform before you send a young U.S. soldier or coalition force member in to get blown the F up. So my thing to you is stop trying to outthink the game. The game is that life and humans are constantly barraging you with information. And all you got to do is you got to pay attention to the little things. You know,
Yeah.
you remember somebody trying to draw the reasonable conclusion about why I'm always carrying the pink phone.
Pink.
You
Yeah.
get what I'm trying to say? And the idea is that we're dealing with people in an environment where they're always wearing camouflage, gillied up, or wearing flat black. So I'm stupid. I'll never lose my pink phone. And if somebody tries to steal it, I'll go, "Hey, you got a pink phone too," and they'll freak out, right? So
Yeah.
nothing means anything unless you take it from the perspective of the person sending that message. And guess what? If your radio is on transmit and mine's on receive and it's on the same bandwidth, I'll be able to read it. But if
Right.
I'm not, then I'm tuned out and I'm not going to read. I'm going to miss key signals that might save my life.
Right. And that's why it's important is you might not like that message or you might
Right?
think whatever, this guy's an idiot or a jackass, but you don't have to agree with the message, but you have to take it into consideration and put it into context. What is it that they're trying to tell the world
With
right
all
now?
these lenses,
Yeah.
and say, based on the totality of the information that I'm receiving at this time and at this place, it's likely that this is happening. And if it's an ML, a most likely course of action, you're probably fine. If it's an MD, a most dangerous course of action,
Well,
you have to act first and act fast because it might be your life you're saving.
right, and so that goes into not jamming the square peg into the round hole, right?
Again,
Like message clothing is a big one, but then you see guys wearing like the affliction shirts or whatever. I'm a fighter, and it's like usually the guys that I've met that are the biggest badass fighters in the world, they don't wear that stuff because one, they don't want people to know, because then people are going to try and fight them, and I can take this guy down. But is this guy for real or whatever? And the other thing is too about that, and especially because we talk about tattoos and people get them, and that changes culturally over time, right?
Yes.
So tattoos now are far more accepted or commonplace than they were even just 10 or 15, 20 years ago. I mean,
exactly.
people
Marin talked about his tats, and Marin's not like Queequeg from Moby Dick. Marin's more like Disney throwaway because he's got like Daffy Duck and all the Scrooge McDuck all over his back for
I got a dolphin riding a unicorn.
Exactly. But the idea of the message is I can't, like, a book is simple, but then you read Jonathan Swift and you find out that he wasn't saying what he was saying. It was what he wasn't saying, or these double entendres that are in there. So if you're convinced that as soon as you see that license plate cover, the surround on a license plate cover, and it immediately draws your ire, maybe that was the intent.
Yeah.
Maybe, again, that it was on it when he rented the car. You
Yeah.
have to take a look. And if you're looking, Brian, you use this all the time. If you're looking through a straw and making your comparisons, you're less likely to come up with the actual answer. Your conclusion is going to be faulty. And if you build something on sand, it's going to collapse.
Right, and those are all kind of great points to kind of bring it in. I think we started off by saying, hey, you don't have to, I don't have to speak the language to read the writing on the wall. Same thing. I don't have to be an expert in symbolism or symbology or tattoos or clothing. I don't have to be an expert to get an understanding of what the message is this person said. I can read it and understand that language, like what becomes threatening graffiti versus non, what's a threatening tattoo versus a non. All those things have different meanings based on the person that like you said,
and the time and the place, and where you're making that observation,
and who that person is, and what the message was meant by it. We know guys that, like, you look at some of their tattoos and there's people who are really into symbolism, are like, those are like horribly racist tattoos, and they're like, he's like, no, this is like my family thing from 500 years ago that back then had a completely different meaning, and now people have taken a new it's the okay
but
sign.
does my behavior indicate something? See, it's not just my t-shirt. The t-shirt's fine, it can show whatever it wants to show.
Yes.
But does my behavior and that t-shirt and the baseline walking into the Walmart, does that now add up to a MD COA? I think that's where you're at, Brian.
Yeah, and that's it. So I know that we kind of covered a lot, but I like using that term graffiti because it's everywhere. You post stuff on Facebook and Instagram. You read other people's posts. That is a form.
Never even think about it.
It's a form of graffiti. That is people sending the message to the world. If I take the time to do that, now, even though it happens all the time, there's people who do it a lot. There's people who are on social media a lot. There's people who use it very little. There's people who don't have it at all. But if I take the time to do that, I'm telling you, this is what's important to me. This is very important to me.
I want to give you a comparison, Brian. You receive, just answer honestly, you receive how many texts from me in an average day?
I don't know, dozen at least, or somewhere right around there, depending on the day. But
do I have any clue to what those little icons mean that I add to my message?
But it's hilarious watching you. It's like watching a monkey figuring out an iPad. It's hilarious.
So what I do on my text is I'll send somebody a text, and I write a text like an email. So it's every single word and a semicolon because I'm an idiot. But when I send it, I always just go through the bottom and pick 3 or 4 random messages because I have no idea what the hip kids know that those messages are. So sometimes it'll come out and somebody will send me back saying, do you know what you just sent? And it's like, oh, shut up, we were using that a long time ago. Or I just sent it at random, which is what I do every day. And I must send a dozen random ones a day.
We could at least we could save that for another podcast, getting into why even those why these emojis and memes and GIFs and all that stuff are the reason we have that is because when you're texting someone, you have no context for what they're saying. So you have to try to place
Precisely.
it. So we come up with little emojis and kissy faces and this, so you understand what it is. Oh, this person's meaning it in this way. It adds context. It's why communication is so difficult over text sometimes with people, but we could save
That's
that.
why in-person training,
Yes.
trumps
Yes.
all other forms of training,
Exactly.
because if you're not in
Exactly.
the room with the people, then you're never going to understand all the nuanced messages that are going by through humans.
All right. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap on. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Thanks. And remember, training changes behavior.
Great seeing you.